Alec Shaw's knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as his bulletproof SUV crawled through the whiteout, snowflakes attacking the windshield like thousands of frozen projectiles, each gust of wind rocking even this massive vehicle. The mountain highway stretched endlessly before him, a frozen wasteland where visibility had dropped to arm's length. Every instinct screamed to reach the security of his estate. Just 3 miles ahead, where warmth and safety waited behind reinforced walls. Then he saw them. Dark shapes materializing through the curtain of white humanoid forms that shouldn't exist in this deadly storm. His foot hit the brake instinctively, the vehicle's advanced stability system preventing the slide on black ice that would have been fatal in lesser machines. Through the swirling chaos, the shapes resolved into something that made his chest tighten with disbelief, and something he hadn't felt in years, genuine shock. A woman stood in the middle of the frozen highway, a small bundle clutched against her chest, 4 children clinging to her navy winter coat like drowning sailors to a life raft. The oldest couldn't be more than 8. The youngest, the bundle in her arms, was an infant, barely visible beneath layers that already looked inadequate against temperatures that had dropped to lethal levels. Alec Shaw had spent 20 years making impossible decisions, calculating risks that would destroy weaker men, navigating a world where sentiment meant death and compassion was a liability. He'd built an empire on cold logic and colder execution, had ordered things done that haunted men with consciences. This moment required no calculation, only the primal human response to see children suffering in sub-zero temperatures. He maneuvered the SUV closer, emergency flashers painting the snow in rhythmic red pulses that seemed to match his accelerating heartbeat. A physical reaction he hadn't experienced in so long. He'd forgotten what adrenaline felt like without violence. Attached, the woman's face snapped toward his approaching vehicle, her expression transforming from desperate hope to raw animal fear in the span of seconds. She pulled the children closer despite having nowhere safe to retreat, despite the highway stretching empty and deadly in both directions. Alec recognized that look instantly. The cornered prey evaluating whether the predator approaching might be salvation or simply a different method of death. A warmer, slower way to meet the end she was already running from. He'd seen that expression on faces in his world, the ones who'd run out of options, who stood at the precipice between survival and surrender. But never on a woman holding an infant in a blizzard on a mountain highway miles from anything. The disconnect was jarring. This wasn't his world. This was a crisis without criminal calculation, without strategic advantage, without any of the frameworks he'd built his entire adult life around. And yet here he was, about to make a decision that would alter everything. Alec killed the engine but left the lights burning, the beams cutting through falling snow like spotlights on a surreal stage. He opened the door slowly, deliberately, the way you'd approach a wild animal, careful movements that communicated intent without threat. The wind hit him like a physical assault, stealing his breath and driving ice crystals into his exposed skin with the force of tiny knives. The temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, not just uncomfortable, lethal, the kind that killed within hours for the unprepared, within minutes for the exposed. His thermal gauge had read -18 Fahrenheit when he'd last checked, and that was before factoring wind chill that probably pushed it past -30. "Please," he called over the howling wind, raising both hands to show they were empty, a gesture foreign to a man whose reputation was built on the implicit threat of violence. "I have heat, shelter, a vehicle that can get us all somewhere safe." The woman didn't move. Her body remained a human shield between him and the children, whose faces he could barely distinguish beneath snow-crusted hoods and scarves wound so tightly they looked like tiny mummies. But he could see their eyes wide, frightened, tracking his every movement with the vigilance of prey that had learned predators wore many faces. Alec took 3 careful steps forward, his expensive Italian leather shoes, utterly inappropriate for this terrain, crunching through snow that had already accumulated past his ankles. He watched her eyes track his every movement, saw the way her arms tightened around the infant, saw the oldest child, a boy in a green coat, shift slightly in front of his younger siblings in an instinctive protective gesture that hit Alec with unexpected force. That boy couldn't be older than 8, and he was already learning to be a shield, already understanding that protection meant putting your body between danger and those more vulnerable, already carrying a burden no child should know. The infant made a thin crying sound that the wind almost swallowed, a weak protest that spoke of exhaustion and cold beyond what tiny bodies could endure. One of the middle children, a girl in a bright yellow coat that stood out like a beacon against the white landscape, whispered something urgent to the woman, tugging at her sleeve with small fingers that looked blue even through her gloves. "My name is Alec," he continued, projecting his voice without shouting. using the tone he reserved for negotiations where lives hung in balance and one wrong word meant permanent consequences. Whatever brought you out here doesn't matter right now. The only thing that matters is getting these children somewhere warm before hypothermia sets in. And it will set in. You have minutes, not hours. He watched her process his words, saw the internal calculation happening behind eyes that held profound exhaustion, and something else. The hollow-eyed recognition of someone who'd been running for so long that even rescue looked like another trap. The woman's lips moved, cracked and bleeding from the cold, forming words he had to step closer to hear over the wind's assault. If you hurt them, I'll find a way to kill you. The threat should have been laughable from someone barely standing, from a woman so clearly at the edge of collapse that a strong gust might topple her. But her eyes held the absolute conviction of a mother willing to weaponize her last breath, willing to spend every remaining moment of consciousness turning herself into a weapon if it meant protecting the children behind her. Understood, Alec replied simply, because he recognized truth when he heard it. He'd made that same promise himself once, years ago, about people he'd loved and lost, had met killers who'd made similar declarations with less genuine intent. This woman meant every word. He gestured toward the SUV where warmth and safety waited behind armored doors and bulletproof glass, a sanctuary from the storm that showed no mercy to the vulnerable or the lost. I'm offering shelter, not interrogation, not demands, just heat and safety until the storm passes. Then you make whatever choices you need to make. The woman took a shuddering step forward, and the children moved with her like a single organism trained through necessity, through circumstances Alec could only imagine but suspected involved its own form of survival against odds that had nothing to do with weather. Each child maintained contact with her or with a sibling, a chain of connection that wouldn't break even in crisis. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together. Alec opened the back door, revealing leather seats and climate-controlled air that billowed out in visible waves, heat meeting cold in a dramatic collision that created momentary fog. The smallest mobile child, a boy who looked perhaps 4, wearing a coat that had been patched so many times, it looked like a quilt, made a sound of pure longing that pierced through Alec's carefully maintained emotional armor like a bullet through flesh. He helped them inside with efficient gentleness, his hands guiding without grabbing, supporting without controlling. Years of commanding men through violence and intimidation hadn't prepared him for this. The delicate requirement of offering help that didn't feel like capture, assistance that didn't look like dominance. The woman climbed in last, positioning herself between him and her children even in this confined space, even surrounded by luxury that must have felt like a different universe from wherever they'd been. Alec noticed everything because observation was survival in his world, because details others missed became leverage or protection. The threadbare quality of their coats, despite the decent brands, good clothes worn to near destruction. The duct tape holding one child's boots together at the sole. The way the woman's coat had been carefully mended in multiple places with different colored thread, suggesting repairs done over time, by hand, with whatever materials were available. The hollow-eyed exhaustion that spoke of weeks rather than hours of struggle, of running rather than traveling, of survival rather than journey. This wasn't a family on an unfortunate trip. This was a family in flight. As he closed the door and returned to the driver's seat, Alec caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror. The face staring back belonged to a man who'd stopped believing in random chance years ago, who'd learned that coincidence was just another word for opportunity or threat depending on perspective, who'd built an empire on the understanding that nothing happened without cause and effect. Yet here he was, collecting strangers from a blizzard for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, altering the trajectory of his carefully controlled existence with a single impulsive decision that violated every protocol he'd established for his own security. The heating system roared to life, and he heard collective sighs from the back seat as warmth began penetrating their frozen layers. The sound was almost painful relief, so profound it bordered on agony, the body's recognition that survival might actually be possible. Alec put the vehicle in gear, beginning the careful journey toward his compound 3 miles ahead, while snow continued its relentless assault on the mountain highway. Behind him, the infant's crying softened to whimpers, and he heard the woman's voice, low and soothing, singing something that might have been a lullaby, or might have been a prayer. "Where were you trying to go?" Alec asked after several minutes of silence, his eyes fixed on the barely visible road, his hands steady on the wheel despite the way the question felt loaded with implications he wasn't ready to examine. The question hung in the warm air, simple on the surface but carrying weight about how this night would unfold. What obligations he was accepting by opening his door to strangers who carried their desperation like visible wounds. The woman's voice emerged quiet but steady despite her chattering teeth, each word chosen with the precision of someone conserving energy or someone who'd learned that every word could be a trap. My husband's uncle, about 50 miles north, but our car died 20 miles back. 20 miles. The implications settled over Alec like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. They'd been walking for hours, probably 6 or more based on the distance and the children's ages, in conditions that killed experienced hikers, that shut down mountain highways, that made survival impossible for anyone caught exposed. With 4 young children and an infant, the math was simple and horrifying. Another hour and he would have been driving past frozen bodies instead of survivors. Another 2 hours and searchers would have found them in spring when the snow melted, arranged in a circle with the mother's body covering the smallest ones in a final, futile attempt at protection. "Your car," Alec said, his voice carefully neutral. "What happened to it?" "Engine just stopped," the woman replied, and Alec heard the exhaustion in her voice, the kind that went bone deep. "No warning. 1 minute we were driving, the next everything went dead. No power, no heat, nothing. I tried to restart it, but she stopped," and Alec heard the unspoken completion of that sentence. "But we were in the middle of nowhere with a storm coming and no phone signal and children who would die if I didn't move." "You did the right thing," Alec said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice, with the need to offer absolution to a stranger who'd made an impossible choice and somehow kept 5 children alive long enough for rescue to arrive. Staying with a dead vehicle in these conditions would have been fatal. You kept moving, kept them alive. That took strength most people don't have. The woman didn't respond, but in the rearview mirror, Alec saw her shoulders shake slightly, not from cold this time, but from the delayed shock of survival, the body's reaction when crisis finally eased enough to allow emotion. They drove in silence for the remaining distance to Alec's estate, the SUV's advanced navigation system compensating for the near-zero visibility. The compound appeared gradually through the snow, first the perimeter lights, then the high walls that kept his world separate from everything outside, then the gates that opened automatically at his vehicle's approach. The woman in the back seat sat up straighter, and Alec saw her eyes widen as she took in the scale of what they were entering. This wasn't a house. This was a fortress disguised as a luxury estate, the kind of property that spoke of serious wealth and serious security in equal measure. "Where are we?" she asked, and for the first time Alec heard real fear in her voice, the kind that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the recognition that she'd just entered a different kind of trap. "Somewhere safe," Alec said, pulling the SUV into the heated garage where 3 other vehicles waited, each one worth more than most people earned in a year. "Somewhere warm. Somewhere the children can recover." He turned to face her properly for the first time since they'd left the highway, seeing her clearly in the garage's bright lights. She was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe early 30s, with auburn hair plastered to her head from melted snow and eyes that held the kind of wariness that came from experience rather than paranoia. "My name is Joanna," she said quietly, her arms still wrapped protectively around the infant. "Joanna Reed. These are my children. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something." "What's that?" Alec asked. "Whatever you're offering, whatever this is," she gestured at the garage, at the obvious wealth, at the security systems visible even here. "We're grateful, but we're not staying long, just until the storm passes. Then we're gone." Alec nodded slowly, understanding the need to establish boundaries, to maintain the illusion of control in a situation where she had none. "Fair enough. Just until the storm passes. No obligations beyond shelter and warmth." It was a lie, of course. Not malicious, but inevitable. Because Alec had already seen what he needed to see: a family in flight, children in danger, a woman running from something that had driven her into a blizzard rather than face it directly. And whatever Joanna Reed was running from, it was about to discover that it had made a fatal miscalculation. Because she'd just stumbled into the protection of a man who'd built an empire on making problems disappear permanently, and who'd just decided for reasons he didn't fully understand, and wasn't ready to examine that this family was under his protection now, whether they wanted it or not. The storm outside continued its assault on the mountain, but inside Alec Shaw's fortress, 5 children and 1 desperate mother had just found sanctuary from more than just the weather. They just didn't know it yet. The estate's main doors opened before Alec could reach them, revealing Samuel, his head of security, whose expression shifted from professional alertness to barely concealed shock when he saw the children. Alec carried the youngest 2, the 4-year-old boy asleep against his shoulder, a tiny girl in pink who couldn't have been more than 3 clinging to his other side. Joanna followed with the infant, and the two older children flanking her like guards, their eyes wide as they took in the marble foyer, the soaring ceilings, the kind of wealth that existed in a different universe from the one they inhabited. "Samuel, I need the East Wing guest suites prepared immediately," Alec said, his voice carrying the authority that made empires move. 5 children's rooms adjacent to the master suite. I want medical supplies, pediatric-focused, clean clothes in various sizes, children's sizes, nothing restrictive. Hot food appropriate for young children who've been undernourished and exposed to extreme cold. No rich sauces, nothing heavy. Broth, warm milk, soft bread. And Samuel, he paused, his voice dropping to something that carried warning, complete discretion. No one outside this household knows they're here. No exceptions. Samuel nodded, already pulling out his phone to make the arrangements happen. I'll have everything ready within 30 minutes. Should I call Dr. Morrison? Yes. Tell him it's priority. I want the children examined tonight, quietly. And Samuel, he doesn't ask questions. He just does his job. Joanna was watching this exchange with eyes that missed nothing, her body tense, despite the warmth beginning to penetrate their frozen layers. Alec could see her making calculations, recognizing the signs of serious wealth married to serious security, recognizing, perhaps, that she'd escaped one kind of danger only to enter another. "Mrs. Reed," Alec said, turning his attention to her, "I'm going to put you in the west sitting room while my staff prepares proper accommodations. There's a fireplace, comfortable furniture, and privacy. The children can rest there while we get rooms ready for the night." "We don't need multiple rooms," Joanna said quickly, her voice sharp with the need to keep her children close. "One room is fine. We stay together. You'll have connected suites," Alec corrected gently. "Doors open between each room. You'll be able to see them from your bed if you want. But they need their own space, and you need to actually sleep instead of maintaining watch all night." Joanna opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to realize that arguing with a man who commanded this kind of wealth and power from his own fortress was pointless. "Fine, but the doors stay open. All of them." "All of them," Alec agreed. He led them to the sitting room he'd mentioned, a space he never used, preferring his private office, but which now served as temporary sanctuary. The fireplace roared to life at his command to Samuel, who'd appeared with 2 of the household staff Alec trusted absolutely. Within minutes, the room transformed. Soft blankets appeared on sofas, pillows materialized. A cart rolled in carrying soup and bread and warm milk in child-safe cups. Alec watched Joanna's careful examination of everything, the way she checked each blanket before wrapping it around a child, the way she tested the temperature of the soup before allowing anyone to eat, the way her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and threats and possible weapons. She was trained, or traumatized enough that survival had trained her. The children ate with the desperate focus of the truly hungry, not scarfing food but consuming it with methodical intensity that suggested this meal might be their last for a while. That fullness was something to achieve before it was taken away. The infant nursed while Joanna held her, but Alec noticed the bottle formula Samuel had provided, sitting ready, anticipating need before it was voiced. "Thank you," Joanna said finally, the words seeming to cost her something. "For this. For stopping. For," she gestured vaguely at the room, "the food. The warmth that was slowly bringing color back to skin that had been dangerously pale. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together." "You don't need to thank me for basic humanity," Alec said. "Though I understand why you would. Your experience has taught you that help comes with strings attached." Her eyes snapped to his, wary and sharp. "And yours doesn't?" "Mine comes with expectations," Alec corrected. "You'll stay until the storm passes and you're all recovered. You'll let a doctor examine the children to ensure no lasting damage from the exposure. You'll eat properly and sleep in actual beds, and accept that for the next few days, you're under my protection. Those are my strings. Survival, medical care, and temporary sanctuary. And after? When the storm passes? Then you make your own choices," Alec said, though the lie tasted bitter because he already knew she wouldn't be leaving. Not if the danger he suspected was real. "You go wherever you were headed. I won't stop you." Joanna studied him with eyes that had learned to read threats in the smallest details. "You're lying. I don't know about what exactly, but you're lying about something." Alec felt respect cut through him sharp as glass. This woman, exhausted and desperate and surrounded by children, was still reading him accurately, still maintaining the vigilance that had kept her alive this long. "I'm lying about it being temporary," Alec admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "Because I don't think whatever you're running from is going to stop just because you kept moving. I think it's going to follow, and when it does, you're going to need more than a warm meal and a night's sleep. You're going to need protection of the kind I can provide." "I don't need a savior," Joanna said, her voice cold. "No," Alec agreed. "You need an army, and you accidentally stumbled into the command center of one. Whether you use it or not is your choice, but I'm going to make sure you understand what you're rejecting if you walk away." Before Joanna could respond, Samuel reappeared with a woman in her 50s, wearing casual clothes but carrying a medical bag. "Dr. Morrison," Samuel introduced. "She's been with Mr. Shaw's household for 8 years, completely discreet." Dr. Morrison's eyes swept the children with professional assessment, her expression softening at what she saw. "I'm going to examine each of them briefly, just to make sure there's no frostbite or hypothermia complications. It won't hurt, and you can stay right beside them the whole time." She worked efficiently, her hands gentle as she checked fingers and toes, listened to hearts and lungs, asked simple questions that the older children answered in whispers. When she finished, she turned to Alec with a nod that communicated more than words they'd survive. No permanent damage, but it had been close. "Mrs. Reed needs examination too," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "She's hypothermic, dehydrated, and showing signs of exhaustion that suggest she hasn't slept properly in days." "I'm fine," Joanna protested. "You're not," Alec said quietly. "And your children need you functional, not collapsing from delayed shock. Let her examine you." The standoff lasted 10 seconds before Joanna's shoulders sagged in surrender. She submitted to Dr. Morrison's examination with the resignation of someone who'd run out of energy to fight every battle. The doctor worked quickly, her expression growing progressively more concerned. "You need IV fluids and at least 12 hours of uninterrupted sleep." "Doctor," Morrison said when she finished, "I can set up an IV here, or you can accept it tomorrow. But one way or another, you're going to need serious rest and rehydration." "Tomorrow," Joanna said, "after I know they're all actually safe." Dr. Morrison looked at Alec, who nodded. They'd work around her need for control because forcing the issue would only make things worse. "The suites are ready," Samuel announced from the doorway. "East wing, connected rooms, everything you requested." Alec stood, offering his hand to the 4-year-old boy who'd been watching him with solemn eyes. "Let's get you somewhere you can actually sleep. Tomorrow you can see the house in daylight. Tonight you just need to be warm and safe." The boy took his hand after glancing at his mother for permission. Joanna nodded, gathering the infant, watching as her other children formed their protective chain again. They moved through the estate like a military unit, and Alec felt something crack in his chest at the sight of children so young already trained in survival tactics. The suites Samuel had prepared were perfect, warm, comfortable, with beds that looked like clouds and connecting doors that stood open as promised. Each room had been stocked with clothes, toiletries, toys chosen with surprising thoughtfulness. Joanna moved through each space, checking windows and locks, memorizing layouts, maintaining her vigilance even here. "The exterior doors are reinforced steel," Alec said from where he stood in the hallway. "The windows are bulletproof glass. The security system would alert me if a bird landed wrong. You're safe here, Joanna. Actually safe. You can let your guard down for a few hours." She turned to face him, and in the soft light of the children's rooms, he saw past the defensive wariness to the bone-deep exhaustion underneath. "I don't know how to do that anymore. Don't remember what that feels like. Then learn," Alec said quietly. "Starting tonight. Your children are safe. You're safe. Whatever's hunting you isn't getting through my walls. Sleep. Actually sleep. I'll maintain watch." "Why?" Joanna asked, and the question held genuine confusion. "Why are you doing this? We're strangers. You don't owe us anything." Alec considered lying, considered offering comfortable platitudes about humanitarian aid or Christian charity or whatever explanation would be easiest to accept. Instead, he offered truth. "Because 20 years ago, I was one of those children. Different circumstances, different threat, but the same terror in the eyes. And no one stopped for me. No one offered sanctuary. I survived alone, and it made me into something cold and isolated. Maybe this is penance. Maybe it's selfishness. Maybe I'm just tired of being alone in a fortress built to keep the world out. I don't know yet. But you needed rescue, and I was there, and now you're here. Everything else we figure out tomorrow." He left before she could respond, closing the door behind him and instructing Samuel to post discreet security on the east wing. Inside those connected suites, 5 children and 1 exhausted mother were beginning to believe that maybe, possibly, they'd found safety. And in his private office, Alec Shaw began making phone calls that would activate resources most people didn't know existed, preparing to protect a family he'd met 3 hours ago, with the same absolute commitment he'd once reserved for his criminal empire. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. But inside these walls, sanctuary had been claimed, whether Joanna was ready to accept it or not. Morning arrived without ceremony, just gradual light penetrating the storm clouds that still dominated the sky. Alec had been awake since 4, monitoring weather reports and making arrangements that turned his fortress into something approaching a home rather than a military installation. When he entered the east wing at 8, he found Joanna already awake in the sitting area between the children's rooms, a cold cup of coffee beside her suggesting she'd been there for hours. "They're still sleeping," she said before he could ask. "All of them." "First time in," she stopped, seeming to realize she was about to reveal too much. "First time in weeks," Alec finished quietly, "because whatever you were running from didn't allow rest. Didn't allow safety long enough to actually sleep." Joanna's hands tightened on the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. In daylight, Alec could see the full extent of her exhaustion, dark circles under eyes that held too much knowledge, fine lines of stress carved into features too young to carry them, the tension of someone who'd been running on pure survival instinct for so long, her body had forgotten how to relax. "I don't know how to do this," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Don't know how to accept help from a stranger who lives in a fortress and commands the kind of resources you clearly have. Every instinct I have says this is another trap, that you're another powerful man who's going to use my children as leverage for something." "What would I leverage them for?" Alec asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. "What do you think I want?" "I don't know," Joanna admitted. "That's what terrifies me. I can handle men who want obvious things, money, control, revenge. Those are transactions, I understand. But you pulled us out of a storm and gave us shelter and asked for nothing. That doesn't make sense in my world. People don't do that. Not without ulterior motives." Alec settled into the chair across from her, maintaining distance that communicated safety rather than threat. "In my world, they don't either. But maybe that's the problem with both our worlds. Maybe we've both lived in darkness so long we've forgotten what humanity looks like when it's not transactional." "You're a criminal," Joanna said bluntly. "I can see it in how your staff responds to you, in the security systems, in the way you give orders expecting absolute obedience. You're not just wealthy. You're powerful in ways that come from operating outside normal rules." "I am," Alec confirmed, respecting her too much to lie. "I've built an organization that exists in gray areas, and sometimes black ones. I've made decisions that would horrify most people. I've ordered things done that I can't take back and wouldn't want to even if I could. That's who I am." "Then why did you stop?" Joanna asked. "Men like you don't stop for strangers. Don't risk exposure by bringing unknown variables into their protected spaces. Don't jeopardize their carefully constructed security for a woman and children they've never met. Because sometimes something breaks through the calculations," Alec said. "Sometimes you see something that bypasses 20 years of trained responses and hits whatever humanity you've got left. Your children standing in that storm, that was my breaking point. That was the thing that reminded me I'm still human underneath all the rest of it." Joanna studied him with eyes that had learned to read lies. "I don't believe you. I think there's more to it. I think you're someone who doesn't make impulsive decisions. And stopping for us was calculated even if you want to pretend it wasn't." She was right, of course. Alec had learned to read threats and opportunities instantly, had made the assessment in seconds that this family posed no danger and might actually be an opportunity for something he hadn't realized he was looking for. But admitting that felt like exposing too much. "Tell me about your husband," Alec said, changing the subject with the skill of someone who'd spent decades controlling conversations. "The children's father. How did he die?" Joanna's expression closed immediately, defensive walls slamming into place. "That's not your business. It is if whatever killed him is still hunting you," Alec said bluntly. "It is if you walked 20 miles through a blizzard because staying where you were meant death. It is if my providing protection requires understanding what I'm protecting you from." The silence stretched long enough that Alec thought she wouldn't answer. Then Joanna's shoulders sagged slightly, exhaustion winning over caution. "Michael died 8 months ago," she said quietly. "Car accident, officially. Lost control on a wet road. Went over an embankment. Died instantly, according to the police. Clean investigation, no questions, case closed. But you don't believe it was an accident, Alex said, reading the truth in her careful phrasing. Michael was an accountant, Joanna continued, her voice flat with suppressed emotion. Worked for a mid-size firm, handled books for various clients. Came home one night 3 months before he died and told me we needed to leave. Didn't explain why, just said we needed to pack essentials and disappear. That he'd found something in the books he wasn't supposed to see, and the people involved didn't leave witnesses. Alec felt his professional interest sharpen. This wasn't random domestic tragedy. This was a man who'd stumbled onto something that got him killed. But you didn't leave, Alec said. I didn't believe him, Joanna said, and pain cracked through her controlled voice. Thought he was being paranoid. Told him we had 4 children and a life, and you don't just abandon everything because of workplace drama. We fought about it. He said I was being naive. I said he was being dramatic. 2 weeks later, he was dead. And then you believed him, Alec said quietly. Then I understood, Joanna corrected. The accident report was too clean, the investigation too brief, the insurance payout too quick. Everything about it felt orchestrated. And when Michael's former boss called to offer condolences and casually mentioned that all of Michael's work files had been seized for audit purposes, I knew. I knew they'd killed him. And I knew we were next if they thought he'd shared what he found with me. Did he? Alec asked. No, Joanna said. He tried to protect me by keeping me ignorant, died trying to protect me, and left me scrambling to protect our children from a threat I couldn't identify or understand. She looked at Alec directly. So yes, we ran. Sold everything quietly, changed our names, moved constantly, used Michael's emergency money that he'd hidden in case his paranoia was justified, and it worked for 8 months. Until 3 days ago when I saw a man watching our apartment. Same man I'd seen 2 months ago in a different city. Same man who was asking questions about a woman with 4 children. And you ran again, Alec said. Grabbed the children and whatever you could carry and got out. Car was already packed, Joanna said. Always kept it packed. We drove north because that's where Michael said his uncle lived, someone he trusted who might help. But the storm came faster than I expected and the car died and she stopped. The memory of those hours clearly still fresh enough to hurt. And then you stopped, and I had to choose between freezing to death and trusting a stranger who might be worse than what I was running from. Alec processed this information with the clinical assessment of someone who'd spent decades understanding threats and vulnerabilities. This wasn't random violence. This was organized elimination of witnesses to something that required enough resources to fake an accident, bribe investigators, and maintain surveillance across multiple cities. What firm did Michael work for? Alec asked. Caldwell and Associates, Joanna said. Why? Alec knew the name. Mid-size accounting firm with connections to several of his competitors, organizations that operated on the same level he did, but with less subtlety and more casual violence. If Michael had found something in their books worth killing for, it would be evidence of money laundering, tax fraud, or financial connections to criminal enterprises that couldn't withstand scrutiny. And you didn't go to the police, Alec said. Michael said they were compromised, Joanna replied. Said whatever he found involved people with enough power to make investigations disappear. Going to the police would just tell them where we were faster. She was probably right. If this involved the kind of operations Alec suspected, local law enforcement would be useless or actively dangerous. The children, Alec said, shifting focus. Tell me about them. Their names, their ages, what they need. Joanna looked surprised by the change in subject but answered. Connor is 8. He's the oldest. Takes his role seriously. Thinks he has to protect everyone. Emma is 6. Bright yellow coat. Never stops talking when she feels safe. The twins are Lily and Michael Jr., they're 4. And the baby is Sophie, 3 months old, born after her father died. He never knew. Her voice broke slightly. Alec felt the weight of that settle on him. A woman widowed while pregnant, running for 8 months with 4 children and an infant. No support system, no resources except what her dead husband had hidden for this exact scenario. They need stability, Alec said. They need to feel safe long enough to stop being in survival mode. They need to be children instead of soldiers. I know, Joanna said, and the pain in her voice suggested this knowledge was its own form of torture. But I can't give them that. Can't stop moving long enough to let them relax. Because the moment we stop, the moment we settle somewhere, that's when they'll find us. That's when my children become collateral damage in someone else's crime. Or, Alec said quietly, you stay here, under my protection, And when they come, because they will come, they discover that you've found sanctuary with someone who can match their resources and exceed their capacity for violence. Someone who won't let them touch your children. Joanna stared at him. To go to war with people you don't even know over a family you met yesterday. Why? Because I can, Alex said simply. Because I have the resources and the capability and the motivation. Because your children deserve better than running forever. And because, he paused, surprised by his own honesty. Because I've spent 20 years building walls that keep everyone out. Maybe it's time to let someone in. Maybe your family stumbling into my fortress wasn't random chance. Maybe it was the universe telling me I've been alone long enough. Before Joanna could respond, the sound of small feet on hardwood announced that the children were waking. Connor appeared first, his green coat from yesterday replaced by clothes from the supplies Samuel had provided, his expression wary as he took in his mother's position and Alex's proximity. "Mom?" he asked, and the question held layers of concern beyond the word. "It's okay," Joanna said, her voice instantly shifting to the reassuring tone mothers mastered. "Mr. Shaw and I were just talking about staying here for a few more days, until we figure out what comes next." Connor studied Alec with eyes too old for 8 years. "Are we safe here?" "Yes," Alex said, meeting the boy's gaze directly. "You're safe here, and I'm going to make sure you stay that way." Connor nodded slowly, accepting the promise with the wariness of someone who'd learned promises often broke. But something in Alex's tone must have communicated sincerity, because the tension in his small shoulders eased slightly. As the other children woke and filtered into the sitting area, Alec watched Joanna transform into the mother she needed to be reassuring, confident, hiding her own fear and exhaustion behind smiles and gentle words. And he understood that protecting this family meant more than just security systems and armed guards. It meant giving them space to heal, to remember what safety felt like, to stop being prey long enough to become human again. And for reasons Alec was only beginning to understand, that had become his mission. If you're still thinking about them, subscribe and become part of our story family. Your support is what keeps these emotional journeys alive. Comment where you're watching from. Let's share this experience together. Alec spent the next 48 hours treating Joanna's situation like a military operation. His private office became a command center, monitors displaying information his team had gathered through channels that didn't officially exist. Michael Reed's accident report, Caldwell and Associates client list, surveillance footage from the building where Joanna had been living 3 days ago, financial records that painted a picture darker than even Joanna had suspected. Samuel stood beside his desk, tablet in hand, reviewing the highlights. Michael Reed was thorough. He didn't just find one irregularity. He'd been documenting systematic money laundering through Caldwell for at least 6 months before his death. Client accounts linked to the Kozlov organization, the Valentini family, 3 different cartels operating out of Mexico. We're talking about $500 million in illegal funds moving through their books annually. And he tried to go legitimate with it, Alex said, reading through Michael's email trail that his hackers had recovered from deleted servers. Reached out to the FBI field office, filed an anonymous tip with the State Financial Crimes Division. Tried to do the right thing. Someone in those offices was compromised, Samuel said. The day after he sent the tip, there's a flag on his personnel file at Caldwell. 3 days later, someone accessed his home computer remotely. A week after that, he's dead. How many people are looking for Joanna? Alec asked. At least 3 teams we can identify, Samuel replied. 1 from Caldwell, their internal security, basically cleaners. 2 more that we can't definitively trace, but that show patterns consistent with contract work. They've been following her across 4 states, always a few days behind, losing the trail whenever she moved but picking it up again through credit card transactions, traffic cameras, any digital footprint she left. Until 3 days ago when she stopped using anything traceable and walked into a blizzard, Alex said. Until she walked into your protection, Samuel corrected. Boss, these aren't amateurs. Caldwell's people have connections to organizations on your level. The contracts they've hired have body counts. If they find her here, this becomes a war. Then let it become a war, Alex said calmly. Start sending messages through appropriate channels. Joanna Reed and her children are under my protection. Anyone who moves against them moves against me. Make sure Caldwell's people understand exactly what that means. That's going to create political complications, Samuel warned. Caldwell does business with the Kozlov organization. You've had a non-aggression pact with Kozlov for 5 years. This could destabilize that. Then it destabilizes, Alex said. I'm not negotiating on this. The Reed family is mine now. Anyone with a problem can bring it directly to me. Samuel nodded, recognizing the tone that ended strategic discussions. I'll make the calls. Should I let Mrs. Reed know what we've found? Yes, Alex said. She deserves to know exactly what she was running from, and exactly what it means that she's here now. He found Joanna in the conservatory, watching her children play in the indoor garden space that had been unused for years but that Samuel had opened specifically for them. Connor was reading to the twins. Emma was examining plants with the fascination of someone rediscovering wonder, and the baby slept in a carrier beside Joanna's chair. They're adapting, Joanna said without looking at him. Too quickly, maybe. Like they're so desperate for safety they're willing to believe this is permanent, even though they know better. Maybe it is permanent, Alex said, settling into the chair beside her. Maybe they're smarter than we are about recognizing when something good appears in the wreckage. Joanna finally looked at him. What did you find? I know you've been investigating. Know you've been making calls. Your security chief has been hovering more than usual, which means something changed. Alec handed her the tablet containing a summary of what his team had compiled. He watched her expression shift from wariness to shock to cold fury as she read through the evidence of exactly what had gotten her husband killed. $500 million, she said finally, her voice hollow. Michael found $500 million in illegal funds, and they killed him like he was nothing, like his life was meaningless compared to protecting this. He was a threat to extremely powerful people, Alex said. People who've built empires on moving money invisibly. He threatened that infrastructure. They responded the way these organizations always respond, by eliminating the threat permanently. And now I'm a threat, Joanna said. Because they think Michael might have told me, might have given me copies of what he found, might have left evidence that could destroy them. Did he? Alec asked. I don't know, Joanna said honestly. He said he had insurance, said he'd put something somewhere safe in case anything happened to him, but he died before he could tell me where. I searched our house, our storage unit, everywhere I could think of. Never found anything. It doesn't matter if you have it or not, Alex said. What matters is they think you might, which means they won't stop until they've confirmed you can't hurt them, and the only way they can confirm that is by making you disappear. Joanna's hands tightened on the tablet. So we run again. Take the children and disappear better this time. I can do that. I've gotten good at disappearing. Or you stay, Alex said quietly. And let me handle the people hunting you. Let me make it clear that touching you means starting a war they can't win. Let me give your children the safety you've been trying to provide alone. You don't know what you're offering, Joanna said. Don't understand the kind of people involved in this. Caldwell and Associates does business with organizations that make wars look like negotiations. The Kozlov organization alone has resources that rival small countries. You can't fight that. I am that, Alec corrected. My organization operates on the same level. I have resources that match theirs and relationships that give me leverage they don't expect. When I say I can protect you, I'm not being optimistic. I'm being coldly realistic about capability and strategic advantage. Why? Joanna asked, and the question held genuine confusion. Why are you willing to risk your organization, your safety, your carefully maintained neutrality, for a family you barely know? What do you actually want from us? I want to not be alone anymore, Alex said, the admission surprising him with its honesty. I've spent 20 years building walls, building power, building security, and I've been utterly alone inside all of it. No family, no connections, nothing except business, relationships, and strategic alliances. Then you and your children appeared in a storm, and for the first time in decades, I felt something other than calculated detachment. I felt the need to protect something beyond my own interests. That's not enough reason to start a war, Joanna said. It's the only reason worth starting one, Alec replied. Business, territory, money, those are just transactions. This is something more. This is choosing to fight for people instead of assets, for connection instead of isolation. Your family is giving me the opportunity to be something other than what I've become, and I'll protect that with everything I have. Joanna stared at him, and Alex saw her processing this revelation with the same careful assessment she applied to every threat and opportunity. You're serious. You're actually willing to destabilize your position, risk your organization, potentially start a war all for the chance to not be alone. Yes, Alex said simply. That's insane, Joanna said, but her voice held something other than rejection, something that might have been the beginnings of trust. It's human, Alec corrected. I've been calculating and cold and strategic for so long I forgot what it felt like to make decisions based on something other than pure self-interest. Your children reminded me. You reminded me, and I'm not going back to what I was." Before Joanna could respond, Connor appeared at her side, his expression troubled. "Mom, who are those men outside?" Alec was moving before Connor finished the question, his phone already out, Samuel's number already dialing. "What men? Where?" "At the front gate," Connor said, pointing toward the monitor in the corner that showed the estate's entrance. 3 cars. Men in suits. They've been there for 5 minutes. Alec pulled up the security feed on his phone. 3 black SUVs, similar to his own. 6 men visible, professional posture, expensive suits that didn't quite hide the weapons they carried. And at the front vehicle, a man Alec recognized from intelligence photos. Viktor Kozlov's primary enforcer. The one who handled problems that required permanent solutions. "Get the children into the safe room," Alec said quietly to Joanna, his voice calm despite the adrenaline sharpening his focus. "Samuel will show you. Don't argue. Don't ask questions. Just go. Now." Joanna recognized the tone of absolute command. She gathered her children with practiced efficiency, following Samuel as he appeared to guide them to the reinforced bunker Alec maintained for exactly this scenario. When they were secure, Alec turned to the monitors, showing Kozlov's people waiting at his gate. They hadn't tried to force entry, hadn't issued threats, were just waiting, making their presence known without overt aggression. This was a negotiation, not an assault. They wanted to talk before they acted. Alec opened the intercom to the gate. "You have 60 seconds to state your business before I activate defensive measures that will turn this standoff lethal." The enforcer stepped forward, looking directly at the camera. "Mr. Shaw, Viktor Kozlov requests a conversation about the family you're currently hosting. We understand you may not be fully aware of the complications their presence creates. Mr. Kozlov would like to clarify those complications before anyone makes decisions that damage our mutually beneficial relationship." Alec considered his options. He could refuse the meeting, activate security that would make his estate truly impenetrable, and dare Kozlov to escalate to open warfare. Or he could have this conversation, make his position clear, and give Kozlov the opportunity to accept the new reality before violence became inevitable. "Tell Kozlov I'll meet with him," Alec said. "Tomorrow, neutral location, limited security on both sides. He can explain his concerns, and I'll explain mine. Then we'll determine if our mutually beneficial relationship survives this." "And the family?" the enforcer asked. "Remains under my protection regardless of what Kozlov and I decide," Alec said coldly. "That's non-negotiable. The only question is whether that protection requires war or can coexist with our current arrangement. Kozlov has 24 hours to consider which outcome he prefers." The enforcer nodded, understanding delivered and received. The SUVs pulled away smoothly. No threats issued, no escalation attempted. Just information gathered and positions clarified. Alec returned to the safe room where Joanna waited with her children, all of them wide-eyed with the fear that came from understanding they'd just moved from hunted to actively targeted. "That was the Kozlov organization," Alec said without preamble. "One of the groups your husband found evidence against. They know you're here. They want to discuss what happens next. And I'm going to make it very clear that what happens next is they leave you alone or they start a war they're not prepared to fight." "You can't fight them," Joanna said, pulling her children closer. "You don't understand what they're capable of." "I understand exactly what they're capable of," Alec corrected. "I've operated alongside them for years. I know their resources, their methods, their tolerances for risk, and I know they value stability more than revenge. If I make protecting you part of my non-negotiable position, they'll adapt. They'll accept the loss rather than destroy a relationship that profits them." "And if they don't?" Joanna asked. "Then tomorrow's meeting becomes the first shot in a war that reshapes the entire criminal landscape of this region," Alec said calmly. "And I'll win, because I've been preparing for this my entire life without knowing it. Everything I've built, every alliance I've maintained, every resource I've accumulated, all of it was practice for this moment, for choosing to fight for something that actually matters instead of just expanding territory." He looked at Joanna and saw her wrestling with the reality that her family's survival now depended on a man she barely knew. A man whose world operated by rules that terrified her, a man who was willing to start a war to protect her. "I'm sorry," Joanna whispered. "Sorry we brought this to your door. Sorry your life is about to become a battlefield because you stopped for strangers in a storm." "Don't apologize," Alec said. This is the first thing I've done in 20 years that actually feels right. That feels like it means something beyond profit and power. Your family didn't ruin my life. You saved it. Now let me save yours." And in a safe room designed to withstand assault, surrounded by children who'd learned too young that safety was temporary and protection was fragile, Alex Shaw made a promise that would define everything that came next. Whatever it took, whoever he had to fight, whatever price he had to pay, Joanna Reed and her children would never be hunted again. That was worth going to war for. That was worth everything. The meeting with Viktor Kozlov was scheduled for noon at a warehouse on neutral territory, a location neither organization controlled, owned by a third party who profited from maintaining peace between competitors. Alec arrived with Samuel and 2 additional security personnel, the minimum required to not appear weak. Kozlov arrived with an identical setup, symmetry that communicated mutual respect even in potential conflict. The Russian was in his 50s, silver-haired and expensively dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of a man who'd built an empire through calculated brutality and survived challenges that killed lesser men. He studied Alec across the empty warehouse floor with eyes that missed nothing. "You're protecting the Reed woman," Kozlov said without preamble, his accent minimal despite Russian being his first language. "This creates complications for organizations who've invested significant resources in ensuring her silence." "She has nothing," Alec said. "Her husband documented your operations, but he died before sharing what he found. She's been running blind for 8 months, surviving on instinct rather than information. She's not a threat to you." "You can't know that," Kozlov replied. "Michael Reed was thorough. He may have left evidence with her without her knowledge, insurance policies hidden in ways she hasn't discovered. Until we can confirm she poses no threat, she remains a liability." "A liability under my protection," Alec said. "Which means attempting to eliminate her requires going through me. That's a war you don't want, Victor. Our current arrangement benefits both organizations. Trade routes, territory divisions, shared intelligence on law enforcement activities, all of that ends the moment you move against the family I've claimed." "Why?" Kozlov asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Why risk everything you've built for strangers? This isn't like you, Alec. You're the most calculating man I know. This decision is emotional, impulsive, dangerous." "Because I'm tired," Alec said, the admission surprising him with its honesty. "Tired of building power that means nothing. Tired of strategic alliances that exist only for profit. Tired of being alone in a fortress I built to keep everyone out. The Reed family stumbled into my protection by accident, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt something other than cold calculation. I felt human, and I'm not giving that up." Kozlov studied him for a long moment. "You're in love with her, the widow." "I barely know her," Alec corrected. "But I know what she represents. Connection, family. Something worth protecting beyond assets and territory. Yes, it's emotional. Yes, it's impulsive. But it's also the first authentic thing I've done in decades." "Authenticity is expensive in our world," Kozlov said. "It makes you vulnerable, makes you weak, or makes me dangerous in new ways," Alec countered. "A man with nothing to lose is predictable. A man protecting something he actually values is unpredictable, motivated by something stronger than profit. You want to know if I'll go to war over this family? Yes, without hesitation. Without calculation. I'll burn everything we've built if that's what protecting them requires." Kozlov was silent, processing this information with the same careful assessment he applied to every strategic decision. The other organizations involved Caldwell's people. The contract teams, they won't accept your protection without challenge. They've invested too much in finding her to walk away empty. Then they'll learn the cost of challenging me, Alec said. "I'll make it very clear what happens to anyone who moves against the Reed family. Public, brutal, permanent consequences that establish new rules. The widow and her children are untouchable. Anyone with a problem can die arguing about it. You're willing to destabilize years of careful peace for this," Kozlov said, and it wasn't quite a question. "I'm willing to redefine what peace means," Alec corrected. "The old rules prioritize profit and territory. The new rules include protecting the family under my care. Organizations can adapt to that, or they can test my commitment. Their choice." Kozlov nodded slowly, understanding delivered. "I'll spread the word through appropriate channels. The Kozlov organization will not move against the Reed family. Our arrangement with you remains intact." "But Alec," he paused, his expression almost sympathetic. "Be very certain this is what you want. Once you've committed to this path, once you've made the family your public weakness, You can't take it back. Everyone will know exactly how to hurt you. Everyone will know where to strike to bring you down. Let them try, Alec said. I've spent 20 years being untouchable by not caring about anything. Maybe it's time to discover what I'm capable of when I actually have something worth fighting for. The meeting ended with understanding rather than agreement, with Kozlov accepting the new reality while making no promises about how others would respond. Alec returned to his estate knowing he'd just painted a target on himself and everyone under his protection, knowing he'd transformed from invulnerable strategist to exposed protector in a single conversation, and knowing he'd do it again without hesitation. He found Joanna in the library, a room she'd discovered the previous day and claimed as a refuge. She looked up from the book she wasn't really reading, her expression guarded. How bad was it? She asked. Manageable, Alec said, settling into the chair across from her. Kozlov won't move against you. He's too pragmatic to start a war over a woman who probably doesn't have evidence that threatens him. The others will be more challenging, but they'll get the message soon enough. The message being that I'm your weakness now, Joanna said. That anyone wanting to hurt you knows exactly where to strike. Yes, Alec confirmed, seeing no point in lying. I've made you and your children into my public vulnerability. It's a strategic disaster and I don't care. Why? Joanna asked, the question she'd been asking in various forms since the night he'd found them. Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's about not being alone anymore. People don't risk empires for companionship. There's something else. Something you're not saying. Alec was quiet for a long moment, weighing honesty against the safety of continued emotional distance. Then he made a decision that terrified him more than any business negotiation ever had. When I was 7, Alec said, his voice carefully controlled. My father was killed in what everyone called a business dispute. My mother disappeared 3 months later, ran away, or was disappeared. I never found out which. I was left with an uncle, who viewed me as a liability, a loose end that connected him to my father's failed empire. He could have killed me. Instead, he left me at a group home with no resources and no explanation. Joanna's expression shifted, professional distance cracking into something that looked like understanding. I spent 8 years in the system, Alec continued. Foster homes that didn't want me, group facilities where survival meant being harder and colder than everyone else, streets where I learned that weakness meant death. By the time I was 15, I'd built my own organization from nothing. By 20, I controlled territory that my father had never touched. By 30, I'd become exactly what my uncle had feared, a Shah who'd survived and thrived, and built an empire from the ashes of abandonment. You survived alone, Joanna said quietly. I survived by making myself invulnerable, Alec corrected. By caring about nothing except power and territory and resources. By building walls so high that nothing could touch me because I'd learned that caring about anything made you weak, made you a target, made you vulnerable to exactly the kind of loss that destroyed my parents. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens where Joanna's children played under Samuel's discreet supervision. And then I saw Connor standing in that storm, shielding his younger siblings with his own body. 8 years old and already learning the lesson I learned, that protection means sacrifice, that keeping people safe requires making yourself a shield. And I recognized him, Joanna, recognized myself in that boy's eyes. The same terror, the same determination, the same absolute conviction that survival was more important than childhood. So this is about Connor, Joanna said. This is about all of them, Alec said. About Connor not having to become what I became. About your children not learning that safety is temporary, and love is conditional, and protection requires destroying parts of yourself. About breaking the cycle of isolation and survival that defined my entire life. He turned to face her. I stopped for your family that night for selfish reasons. Because seeing Connor in that storm was like watching my 7-year-old self standing at the group home door. And this time I had the power to change the outcome. This time I could offer sanctuary instead of abandonment. This time I could be the person who stopped instead of the child everyone left behind. Tears tracked down Joanna's face, and Alec realized his own eyes were damp, a physical response he hadn't experienced in over 2 decades. You're trying to save yourself by saving us, Joanna said. I'm trying to prove that power without connection is meaningless, Alec corrected. I've spent 20 years building an empire that kept me completely alone, utterly isolated, safely protected from ever caring about anything enough to be hurt by it. And I thought that was strength. Thought invulnerability was the ultimate achievement. But it's just another kind of prison, Joanna said, understanding clicking into place. It's the worst kind, Alec agreed. Because you build it yourself, lock yourself inside, and convince yourself that isolation is freedom, instead of recognizing it as fear disguised as strength. He moved back to the chair across from her, leaning forward with intensity that made his words feel like confession. I'm not a good man, Joanna. I've done things that would horrify you. Ordered consequences that haunt the part of me that's still capable of guilt. Built my empire on violence and intimidation and calculated cruelty. But your children, your family, you're giving me the opportunity to be something other than what I've become. Something that actually matters beyond profit and power. We're your redemption project, Joanna said, but her voice held understanding rather than accusation. You're my reason to stop building walls, Alec corrected. To choose connection over isolation. To discover if I'm capable of protecting something without destroying it in the process. And yes, that's selfish. Yes, I'm using your family to give my life meaning it's been missing. But Joanna, I will protect you with everything I am. I will fight wars to keep your children safe. I will burn down anyone who threatens what we're building here. Not because I'm noble, but because you've become the thing I didn't know I needed. The silence stretched between them, heavy with admissions that couldn't be taken back, with vulnerability that violated every rule both of them had learned for survival. My children like you, Joanna said finally. Connor especially. He watches you with the same careful assessment he applied to every adult we encountered while running, and yesterday he asked me if we were going to stay here. If this could be home. What did you tell him? Alec asked. I told him I didn't know, Joanna said. Told him we needed to be careful. That safety was temporary. That we'd learned not to get comfortable anywhere. And he looked at me with those two old eyes and said, But Mom, Mr. Shaw is different. He's not pretending to be safe. He's actually protecting us. He's right, Alec said. I am protecting you. And I'm not going to stop just because the storm has passed, or because you've recovered from hypothermia, or because enough time has elapsed to make leaving reasonable. You're here now. You're mine now. And I don't give back what I've claimed. That's terrifying, Joanna said. That's commitment, Alec corrected. Something neither of us has experienced in a long time. Something that scares us because we've both learned that attachment means vulnerability. But maybe, he paused, searching for words that felt too honest to speak but too important to suppress. Maybe vulnerability with the right person is actually strength. Maybe choosing to care despite the risk is braver than choosing safety through isolation. Joanna stood, moving to the window where she could watch her children playing. If I agree to this, if I accept your protection and let my children believe this is home, I need you to understand something. I need you to promise me something that has nothing to do with security or resources or fighting off threats. What? Alec asked. Promise me you won't become another thing they lose, Joanna said, her voice breaking slightly. Promise me this isn't temporary protection until you get bored, or until we become inconvenient, or until your life returns to normal and you remember why isolation was safer. My children have lost their father. They've lost stability and safety and everything familiar. They can't survive losing another person they've learned to trust. Alex stood, closing the distance between them, turning her to face him with gentle insistence. I promise you this is permanent. I promise I'm not going anywhere. I promise that protecting your family has become the most important thing I've ever done, and I won't abandon that just because it's difficult or complicated or dangerous. Your children won't lose me, and neither will you. How can you be so certain? Joanna asked. Because, for the first time in 20 years, I've found something worth more than my empire, Alex said. Worth more than safety through isolation. Worth more than the walls I built to keep everyone out. You and your children, you're what I've been missing without knowing it. You're the family I needed. Without understanding, I was building a fortress specifically to protect something I hadn't found yet. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in the first genuine embrace he'd initiated in years. I'm not letting you go, Joanna. I'm not walking away. I'm not going to be another loss your children have to survive. I'm going to be the constant they can count on. The protection they can trust. The home that doesn't disappear. Joanna collapsed against him, her carefully maintained control finally breaking, crying into his chest with the force of 8 months of terror and exhaustion and desperate survival. Alec held her through it, his own eyes damp, his chest tight with emotions he'd spent decades suppressing. And in a library filled with books about other people's stories, 2 wounded survivors began writing their own, a story about choosing vulnerability over safety, about building family from wreckage, about discovering that the strongest fortress was one with doors that opened instead of walls that only kept everyone out. 3 days after the confession, Joanna found Alec in his office at 2 a.m, surrounded by monitors displaying security feeds and intelligence reports. He looked exhausted, the kind of deep tiredness that came from maintaining constant vigilance against threats that never stopped coming. "You don't sleep anymore," Joanna said from the doorway. "Haven't really slept since we arrived. Just brief naps between monitoring security and making calls and preparing for attacks that might never come." "They'll come," Alex said without looking away from the screens. "Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually, someone will test my commitment. We'll try to determine if protecting your family is genuine or strategic posturing, and when they do, I need to be ready to respond with overwhelming force." Joanna entered the office, closing the door behind her. "You're going to collapse before anyone attacks. You're running yourself into exhaustion trying to protect us from theoretical threats." "The threats aren't theoretical," Alec corrected. "I've intercepted 3 separate reconnaissance attempts in the last 72 hours. Someone's probing security, testing response times, mapping vulnerabilities. They're not attacking yet, but they're preparing to. And I need to be ready." "Samuel can handle security," Joanna said. "That's literally his job. You hired him because he's capable and thorough. Let him do his job while you get actual rest." "I can't," Alec admitted, and something in his voice suggested this was about more than just tactical vigilance. "Can't let my guard down. Can't sleep when I know people are actively planning to hurt what I'm protecting. Can't risk failing through inattention or exhaustion or allowing myself to believe safety is real instead of something I have to actively maintain every second." Joanna moved closer, seeing past the security feeds to the real issue underneath. "This isn't about tactics. This is about fear. You're terrified that if you stop watching, stop preparing, stop maintaining constant control, something will slip through your defenses, and I'll lose my children the way you lost your parents." The accuracy of her assessment hit Alec like a physical blow. "Yes, I'm terrified that my protection won't be enough. That despite everything I've built, despite all my resources and preparation, something will get through, and your children will experience the same terror I did, the same abandonment, the same absolute destruction of safety. So you're trying to be invulnerable," Joanna said. "Trying to control every variable, eliminate every threat, create perfect safety through sheer force of will and unlimited resources. Alec, that's not possible. Perfection isn't real. Absolute security doesn't exist. At some point you have to accept that you've done everything you can and trust that it's enough." "How?" Alec asked, and the question held genuine desperation. "How do I trust that my protection is sufficient when I know exactly what happens when protection fails? When I've lived the consequences of trusting that adults would keep children safe?" Joanna settled into the chair beside him, taking his hand with surprising gentleness. "You trust, because the alternative is this endless vigilance that destroys you through exhaustion, constant fear that prevents you from actually living with the family you're protecting, isolation, disguised as security that defeats the entire purpose of building connection in the first place. If something happens to your children because I wasn't vigilant enough," Alex started. "Then we'll handle it together," Joanna interrupted. "Not with you shouldering every burden alone. Not with you destroying yourself trying to be invulnerable. Together, as partners, as family, as people who've chosen to trust each other despite every reason we've learned not to trust anyone." She pulled his attention away from the monitors, forcing him to look at her instead of the security feeds. "I need to tell you something about why I'm here, in your office, at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping in the comfortable bed you provided." "Why?" Alec asked. "Because I spent 8 months running," Joanna said. 8 months certain that accepting help meant accepting control. That powerful men were dangerous regardless of their intentions. That the only person I could trust to protect my children was myself. And I was wrong, Alec. Wrong about so much. Because by refusing to trust anyone, I nearly killed my children. Nearly froze them to death in a storm. Because I was too proud and too damaged to recognize when someone was offering genuine help. "You were protecting them," Alec said. "I was isolating them," Joanna corrected. "The same way you've been isolating yourself. Building walls and calling it safety. Rejecting connection and calling it strength. Choosing loneliness and calling it independence. And it nearly destroyed us." She moved closer, her hand tightening on his. "When you stopped for us that night, when you offered shelter despite every reason you had to keep driving, you did something I'd convinced myself didn't exist anymore. You chose compassion over calculation. You risked your safety for strangers. You proved that powerful men could be protectors instead of predators. And that scared me more than the storm did, because it meant reevaluating everything I'd taught myself about survival. But you accepted my help, Alex said. You came inside. You let me bring you here. Because my children were dying, Joanna said bluntly. Because survival outweighed fear. But accepting help in crisis isn't the same as choosing trust in safety. And for the past 5 days I've been watching you. Watching how you interact with Connor. How you've transformed this fortress into something that feels like home. How you're destroying yourself trying to protect us perfectly. And I've realized something. What? Alec asked. That you need us as much as we need you, Joanna said. That this isn't charity or redemption or strategic protection. This is mutual salvation. We're saving each other from the isolation that was destroying us both. From the walls we built that became prisons. From the survival strategies that worked until they didn't. She stood, pulling him up with her, forcing him away from the monitors and the security feeds and the endless vigilance. So, I'm making a choice right now. A real choice. Made in safety rather than crisis. Made with clear mind rather than desperate survival. I'm choosing to stay here. To accept your protection. To build a life with you instead of running from another threat. To trust that you're not going to become another thing my children lose. Joanna, Alex started, but she continued. And I need you to make the same choice, Joanna said. To accept that perfect protection is impossible. To trust that you've built sufficient security without destroying yourself maintaining it. To believe that being human and vulnerable and imperfect with us is more valuable than being an invulnerable guardian who never sleeps, never rests, never allows himself to actually connect with the family he's protecting. I don't know how to do that, Alec admitted. Don't know how to be vulnerable without it feeling like failure. Don't know how to trust that my protection is enough without constant verification. Then learn, Joanna said, echoing his words from days earlier. Learn with us. Let Connor teach you how to play instead of just protecting. Let Emma show you how to find joy in small things. Let the twins demonstrate that sometimes security is just being present rather than constantly monitoring threats. Let Sophie remind you that babies need warmth and presence more than perfect safety. She pulled him toward the door, away from the office that had become his command center. Come with me. Away from the monitors, away from the security feeds, away from the endless preparation for attacks that might never come. Come be with your family instead of just protecting them from a distance. My family, Alec repeated, and the words felt foreign and precious simultaneously. Your family, Joanna confirmed. Whether you're ready to admit it or not, that's what we've become. Not guests, not people under your protection, not a redemption project or strategic assets. Family, messy, complicated, imperfect family that needs you present more than they need you, invulnerable. They walked through the quiet estate, past security measures that would have impressed military installations, past empty rooms Alec had maintained but never truly inhabited, past evidence of wealth and power that meant nothing compared to what waited in the East Wing. The children were asleep in their connected suites, doors open as Joanna had demanded, nightlights casting soft illumination that allowed parental verification without disturbing rest. Connor had kicked off his blankets as usual. Emma was clutching a stuffed elephant Samuel had acquired from somewhere. The twins were sprawled in their shared room in the abandoned positions only truly safe children achieved, and Sophie slept in the bassinet beside Joanna's bed, breathing steadily, completely unaware of the threats that circled beyond secure walls. This is what you're protecting, Joanna said quietly. Not abstract concepts of family or redemption. These specific children. This specific life. This specific chance to build something real from the wreckage of what we've both lost. Alex stared at the sleeping children, feeling something crack in his chest, the careful control he'd maintained for 20 years, the emotional distance that had kept him safe, the walls that had protected him from caring too much about anything, all of it fracturing under the weight of actually seeing what he'd claimed as his own. I don't know how to be a father, Alex said. Don't know how to be the man they need. Don't know if I'm capable of being something other than a protector who maintains distance. Then we learn together, Joanna said. You teach me to trust that powerful men can be safe, and I'll teach you that vulnerability isn't weakness. You show me that protection can exist without control, and I'll show you that connection is worth the risk of loss. We build this together, imperfectly, learning as we go, making mistakes and fixing them, and choosing each other every single day. She turned to face him fully, her hand reaching for his face with tenderness he hadn't experienced in decades. I'm asking you to choose us, Alec, not as a strategic decision or a redemption project or a response to childhood trauma, but as a genuine choice to build family with people who are choosing you back, to risk everything you've protected yourself from love and vulnerability, and the possibility of loss, because the alternative is the isolation that was destroying you. What if I fail? Alec asked. What if I can't be what they need? What if my instinct to control and protect and maintain distance destroys what we're trying to build? Then we'll handle it, Joanna said simply. Together. With honesty and patience, and the understanding that none of us know what we're doing. That we're all learning how to be family after years of survival. That mistakes are inevitable, but abandonment doesn't have to be. She kissed him, then soft, careful, a gesture that communicated choice rather than desperation, commitment rather than gratitude. And Alec, who'd spent 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability, kissed her back and chose to believe that maybe, possibly, building family was worth the risk of everything he'd protected himself from. When they broke apart, Joanna smiled with something that looked like hope. Now come to bed. Actual bed, actual sleep, actual rest. The monitors will be there tomorrow. The threats will still exist. The security will maintain itself for 6 hours. Let yourself be human for a little while. Let yourself be part of this family instead of just its guardian. I don't remember how to sleep without monitoring threats, Alec admitted. Then I'll teach you, Joanna said. The same way you taught me that accepting help doesn't mean losing control. We'll learn together, make mistakes together, build this impossible family together despite every reason we've learned that families are temporary and safety is conditional and love is dangerous. They settled into Joanna's suite, Alec awkward in this domestic space, uncertain about the boundaries of this new reality they were building. But when Joanna pulled him close, when her breathing steadied into sleep, when the children in adjacent rooms remained safe and undisturbed, Alec felt something he hadn't experienced since he was 7 years old. Home, not the fortress he'd built, not the wealth he'd accumulated, not the power he commanded, but the specific warmth of being wanted, being chosen, being part of something that mattered more than survival. And for the first time in 20 years, Alec Shaw slept peacefully, surrounded by the family that had chosen him back, trusting that tomorrow they'd continue building something worth more than all his careful isolation. Alec woke to the sound of children's laughter, high, uninhibited, the kind of joy that came from feeling safe enough to express it. He blinked against morning light, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings of Joanna's suite, by the warmth beside him suggesting he'd actually slept through the night, by the absence of immediate threat assessment that usually dominated his waking moments. Joanna was already gone, her side of the bed empty but still warm. Through the open door, he could hear her voice mixing with the children's, patience and love evident in every word. Alec stood, pulling on the previous day's clothes, and followed the sound to the main living area, where his carefully maintained fortress had transformed into something that looked almost normal. Connor was reading to the twins from a picture book, his voice serious as he explained the story's plot with the gravity of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. Emma was building an elaborate structure from blocks Samuel had somehow acquired overnight. Her bright yellow dress, same color as the coat she'd worn in the storm, standing out like sunshine against expensive furniture. And Joanna sat with Sophie, the infant content in her arms, watching her children with the relief of a mother who'd finally stopped running. "Good morning," Joanna said when she noticed him. "Coffee's in the kitchen. Fair warning, it's terrible. I haven't figured out your espresso machine yet, so I used the regular coffee maker I found buried in the back. It might qualify as punishment." "I'll survive," Alec said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Bad coffee felt like a small price for the scene in front of him. Children comfortable enough to play, a mother relaxed enough to smile. The evidence that sanctuary was becoming home. He found the kitchen a space he rarely used, preferring to have meals delivered by staff, and poured himself coffee that was indeed terrible. He was still staring at it when Connor appeared beside him, the boy's green coat replaced by normal clothes, but his expression still carrying the wariness of someone who'd learned to assess threats constantly. "Mom says you didn't used to let people live here," Connor said without preamble. "Says this is the first time anyone stayed in your house in a long time. Why?" Alec considered how much honesty an 8-year-old could handle, then decided that Connor had already seen too much of reality to accept comfortable lies. "Because I was afraid that letting people close meant giving them power to hurt me. So I built walls and lived alone and convinced myself that safety was more important than connection." "But you let us stay," Connor said. "Because you reminded me of myself," Alec replied, "standing in that storm, protecting your siblings, being brave when you were terrified. I was like that once, and I didn't want you to become what I became, someone so focused on safety that they forget how to be human." Connor processed this with the seriousness that defined everything he did. "Are you going to make us leave?" When we're not in danger anymore? No, Alec said firmly. You're not leaving. This is your home now. All of you. For as long as you want it to be. But what if your enemies come? Connor asked. What if we make you vulnerable, like Mom said? What if protecting us means you get hurt? Alec knelt down so he was eye level with the boy, seeing the genuine concern in eyes too old for 8. Connor, I've spent 20 years being invulnerable. It didn't make me happy. It just made me alone. Your family being here, you being here, you've given me something worth protecting that's more important than being safe. I'd rather be vulnerable with people I care about than invulnerable and alone. That's really brave, Connor said quietly. Choosing to care about people even when it's dangerous. That's braver than just being strong alone. I learned it from you, Alec said truthfully. From watching you protect your siblings in that storm. You taught me that real strength is protecting what matters, not just protecting yourself. Connor smiled a genuine child's smile that transformed his too serious face into something that looked like actual childhood. I like you. You're different from other adults. You don't lie about things being safe when they're not. You just promise to fight really hard to keep us safe anyway. That's exactly what I promise, Alec confirmed. Not perfect safety, because that doesn't exist, but absolute commitment to fighting for your family, for being the person who doesn't leave when things get difficult. Mom says you're going to marry us, Connor said. And the phrasing was so innocent it made Alec's chest ache. I'm going to marry your mother, Alec corrected gently. But yes, that means becoming part of your family, becoming someone you can count on. Becoming, he paused, the word feeling enormous and terrifying and necessary. Becoming your father, if you'll let me, not replacing the father you lost, but being the father you need now. Connor studied him with those assessing eyes, then nodded once. Okay, you can be our father, but you have to promise something. What? Alec asked. Promise you won't die, Connor said, and the fear in his voice suggested this was the trauma that defined him. Promise you won't leave like Dad did. Promise you'll stay even when things are scary or dangerous or hard. Alec felt his throat tighten. I can't promise I won't die. No one can promise that. But I can promise I'll fight harder than anyone you've ever met to stay alive. I'll be careful and protected, and I won't take unnecessary risks. And Connor, I promise I will never choose to leave. Never abandon you because things get difficult. Never walk away from this family because protecting you becomes complicated. I'm here, permanently, for whatever comes next. Connor stepped forward and hugged him a brief, fierce embrace that communicated more than words. Then he pulled back, his composure restored, and returned to reading to his siblings like the conversation had never happened. Alec stood there for a moment, processing the enormity of what he'd just promised. He'd committed to being a father to 5 children, to being the constant they could trust, to choosing family over the safety of isolation. It was terrifying. It was necessary. It was right. He found Joanna in the conservatory later, watching Emma examine plants with the fascination of someone discovering the world could be beautiful instead of just dangerous. Connor asked me to promise I wouldn't die, Alec said without preamble. Asked me to promise I'd stay even when things get hard. What did you tell him? Joanna asked. That I can't promise immortality, but I can promise commitment, Alec said. That I'll fight to stay alive, and I'll never choose to leave. That I'm choosing this family permanently, not just until the crisis passes or until my life returns to normal. Good, Joanna said. Because we're choosing you too, all of us. Not because you're protecting us or because we're grateful or because we don't have other options, but because you've become family. Because this fortress has become home. Because we've decided you're worth the risk of trusting again. She moved closer, her hand finding his. I need to ask you something. Something that terrifies me but that I need to know. What happens if the threats never stop? What happens if Michael's evidence eventually surfaces and makes us permanent targets? What happens if protecting us requires fighting wars that last years instead of weeks? Will you regret choosing us? Will you wish you'd kept driving that night? No, Alec said firmly. Because even in the worst possible scenario, even if protecting you requires burning down everything I've built, I'll have something I haven't had in 20 years. I'll have family. I'll have connection. I'll have people who matter more than power or territory or safety through isolation. That's worth everything, Joanna. That's worth any war I have to fight. Before she could respond, Emma appeared at Joanna's side, tugging on her sleeve with the insistence only small children could achieve. Mommy, can Mr. Alec help me build my castle? I need someone tall to put the tower on top, and you're not tall enough. Joanna smiled. I think Mr. Alec would be happy to help. He's very good at building things. Emma grabbed Alec's hand with complete trust, pulling him toward the elaborate block structure that covered most of the conservatory floor. It's a castle for the princess, Emma explained with the seriousness that suggested this was critically important information. But it needs a tower so she can see the dragons coming. Can you build a tower? I can build a tower, Alec confirmed, settling onto the floor with a lack of dignity that would have horrified his business associates. Tell me about this princess. What's she like? She's brave, Emma said immediately. And she has a sword. And she doesn't wait for princes to save her because she can save herself. But she has friends who help when the dragons are too big. That's important. You can't fight all the dragons alone. The wisdom of 6-year-olds wrapped in play, Alec thought. You can't fight all the dragons alone. He built the tower while Emma directed, adding blocks with careful precision while she explained the princess's adventures in elaborate detail. The twins joined eventually, adding their own ideas to the construction, debating architecture with the intensity only 4-year-olds could achieve. And Connor appeared with Sophie, the baby content to observe while Connor offered structural suggestions that were surprisingly thoughtful. By the time the castle was complete, a sprawling structure that violated every principle of physics but stood through sheer determination, Alec had been thoroughly integrated into the game. He was assigned the role of the friendly dragon who guarded the castle, while Connor became the knight, Emma the princess, and the twins the royal advisors who offered commentary on every development. Joanna watched from her chair, holding Sophie, a smile on her face that suggested she was witnessing something she'd thought lost forever. Her children playing, genuinely playing, the way children were meant to before survival became more important than joy. When the game eventually dissolved into chaos and laughter, when the castle collapsed under enthusiastic reenactment of a dragon attack, when the children scattered to different activities with the scattered attention of the young, Alec found himself sitting on the conservatory floor surrounded by blocks, slightly disheveled, and happier than he could remember being in decades. You're good at this, Joanna said from her chair. At playing. At being present with them instead of just protecting them from a distance. You're becoming the father they need. I'm learning, Alec corrected. Learning that protecting isn't the same as connecting. Learning that being present matters more than being invulnerable. Learning that, he paused, searching for honesty. Learning that I want this. Want the chaos and the laughter and the blocks on the floor. Want the conversations with Connor about bravery and the castle building with Emma and the debates with the twins. Want to be their father, not just their guardian. Then you are, Joanna said simply. The definition of being a parent is wanting them, choosing them, committing to them even when it's difficult. You've done all of that. You are their father. Now you just need to believe it. That evening, after the children had eaten dinner that Alec's bewildered chef had prepared for actual children instead of business associates, after baths had been navigated and pajamas negotiated and teeth brushed with varying degrees of success, Alec found himself reading bedtime stories to the twins, while Joanna handled Sophie and Connor read to Emma in the adjacent room. The domesticity of it was surreal. Alec Shaw, who commanded criminal organizations and negotiated with dangerous men, was reading about talking animals and magical forests to 4-year-olds who demanded he do the voices properly. And when they finally fell asleep, when their breathing evened into the steady rhythm of the truly safe, Alec felt something he hadn't experienced since he was 7 years old, sitting in his father's lap listening to stories before everything fell apart. He felt like he belonged somewhere, like he was part of something that mattered more than power or wealth or territory. Like he'd finally, after 20 years of building walls, found the thing worth building toward instead of away from. Family. Messy, chaotic, imperfect, beautiful family that chose each other despite every reason they'd learned not to trust anyone. And as he left the twins' room, closing the door softly, he found Joanna waiting in the hallway with an expression that suggested she'd been watching his transformation with quiet approval. "Welcome home," she said simply, and Alec understood that she wasn't talking about the fortress or the estate or the physical space. She was talking about the family he'd found inside his own walls, after 20 years of keeping everyone out. He was home, finally, impossibly, completely home. The decision to marry came not from romance, but from cold, strategic necessity wrapped in genuine emotion. Alec made the case 3 days after the castle building incident, in his office with legal documents spread across his desk, and Joanna sitting across from him trying to understand why a man who'd just become her children's father figure was now proposing marriage with the clinical precision of the process, a business negotiation. Legal marriage provides the highest level of protection available under law, Alec explained, his finger tracing through documents his attorneys had prepared. As your husband, I have automatic parental rights to your children in case anything happens to you. They can't be taken by the state, can't be claimed by relatives who might have agendas, can't be separated if emergency circumstances arise. They stay with me, under my protection, regardless of external variables. You're proposing marriage for custody rights, Joanna said, her voice carefully neutral. I'm proposing marriage for comprehensive protection, Alec corrected. Custody is part of it, but there's also the financial aspect. As my wife, you have access to resources that can't be frozen or seized, legal protections that extend beyond what I can provide through guardianship. The ability to make medical and educational decisions without requiring my permission or presence. And, he paused, meeting her eyes directly, the public declaration that you and your children are permanently mine, that anyone moving against you moves against my family, not just people under my protection. There's a difference? Joanna asked. There's a significant difference, Alec said. Protected guests can be negotiated over, can be traded as strategic assets if pressure becomes sufficient. Family is non-negotiable. Family is worth burning everything down to protect. Marriage makes that distinction legally and publicly clear. Joanna studied the documents without touching them. This is the most unromantic proposal I've ever heard. And I'm including the time Michael proposed while we were both sick with food poisoning, and he wanted to make sure I'd inherit his student loans if he died. I'm not proposing romance, Alec said. I'm proposing strategic partnership with genuine emotional commitment. I'm proposing that we formalize what we've already built, family protection, mutual salvation from isolation. I'm proposing we make legal what's already true emotionally. And what's true emotionally? Joanna asked. Alec stood, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of her, close enough that pretense became impossible. That I love you, that I love your children, that you've become the most important thing in my life, and I want that formalized in every way possible, legally, publicly, emotionally. That I want to marry you not just for strategic protection but because I choose you. Choose this family. Choose the life we're building together over the isolation I maintained for 20 years. You love me, Joanna repeated, and something in her voice suggested she hadn't expected honesty wrapped in strategy. I love you, Alec confirmed. Didn't plan to, didn't think I was capable of it after 20 years of emotional detachment. But somewhere between finding you in that storm and building castles with Emma and making promises to Connor, I fell in love with all of you, and I want that love protected by every legal mechanism available. That's still the least romantic declaration I've ever heard, Joanna said, but tears were tracking down her face, undermining the criticism. I don't know how to be romantic, Alec admitted. Don't know how to propose with flowers and speeches about destiny. I only know how to be honest about what I want and why I want it. And I want to marry you, Joanna. Want to be your husband and your partner and your children's father. Want to build a life that survives whatever comes next. Want to make permanent what we've both learned is worth more than safety through isolation. Joanna stood, closing the distance between them, her hands finding his face with tenderness that still surprised him every time she offered it. Ask me properly. Not as a strategic partnership, not as legal protection. Ask me as a man who loves a woman he wants to spend his life with. Alec took a breath, abandoning the clinical approach, reaching for honesty that felt more vulnerable than any business negotiation. Joanna Reed, will you marry me? Not because it's strategic or protective or legally advantageous, but because I love you and your children more than I thought I was capable of loving anything. Because you've transformed my fortress into a home and my isolation into family. Because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that choosing you was the best decision I've ever made. Will you marry me? Yes, Joanna said, and the word held weight beyond simple agreement. Yes, I'll marry you. Because you've proven that powerful men can be protectors. Because you've shown my children what safety actually looks like. Because you've chosen us when you didn't have to. Protected us when it was dangerous. Loved us when it was vulnerable. Yes, Alec Shaw, I'll marry you. The kiss that followed was different from the careful gestures they'd shared previously, deeper, more certain, carrying the weight of commitment rather than tentative exploration. And when they broke apart, both breathless, Joanna smiled with something that looked like complete trust. When? She asked. Soon, Alec said. This week if possible. The longer we wait, the longer my enemies have to plan disruptions. The faster we formalize this, the faster the protections become absolute. You're turning our wedding into a strategic defensive operation, Joanna observed. I'm turning our wedding into a declaration of permanent commitment that happens to have significant defensive advantages, Alec corrected. We can have romance later. Right now we need legal protection and public declaration. The feeling underneath all of it that's already real. The paperwork just makes it official. They planned the ceremony for 3 days later, a private event in the estate's library with only Samuel and his wife Elena as witnesses, the children as participants, and a judge Alec trusted absolutely to handle the legal requirements without asking uncomfortable questions about why a mafia boss was suddenly acquiring a ready-made family. The 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Alec's staff transformed the library into something that looked almost romantic, flowers that Elena assured him were appropriate, lighting that softened the space without being obvious, chairs arranged for the small audience. Joanna found a dress that wasn't quite a wedding gown but was beautiful enough to feel ceremonial, and the children, upon being told their mother was marrying Alec and he was officially becoming their father, responded with varying degrees of enthusiasm that ranged from Connor's solemn approval to Emma's insistence on wearing her yellow dress because weddings need yellow. The night before the ceremony, Alec found himself in his private office again, not monitoring security feeds but staring at documents his attorneys had prepared: marriage license, custody paperwork, financial protections, the legal infrastructure that would transform Joanna and her children from protected guests into permanent family. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his expression carrying something that might have been approval. "Having second thoughts, boss?" "Having all the thoughts," Alec admitted. 24 hours from now, I'll be legally responsible for 5 children and married to a woman I met 2 weeks ago. Every strategic bone in my body says this is insane, that I'm moving too fast, committing too deeply, making myself vulnerable in ways that will destroy everything I've built. "And the parts of you that aren't strategic?" Samuel asked. "Those parts recognize that I've been alone for 20 years and it was killing me slowly," Alec said. "That isolation disguised as strength is just fear given a better name. That Joanna and her children have given me the thing I've been missing without knowing it: purpose beyond power, connection beyond calculation, family worth protecting more than territory." "So you're choosing them," Samuel said. "I've already chosen them," Alec corrected. "Tomorrow just makes it official, makes it public, makes it permanent in ways that survive my death if necessary. I'm not having second thoughts, Samuel. I'm having the absolute certainty that this is right, combined with the terror that I'll somehow fail them, that I won't be the husband and father they deserve, that my world will destroy what we're trying to build." "You won't fail them," Samuel said with unusual gentleness. "I've worked for you for 8 years, boss. I've seen you handle every crisis with cold efficiency and strategic brilliance. And in the past 2 weeks, I've watched you transform from an isolated tactician into someone who builds castles with children and reads bedtime stories and chooses vulnerability over safety. That transformation, that's not strategic, that's genuine. And it's the most impressive thing I've ever seen you accomplish. Changing diapers and playing dragon is more impressive than building a criminal empire?" Alec asked with slight humor. "Yes," Samuel said seriously. "Because anyone can build power through violence and intimidation, but choosing to be human after years of isolation, choosing to be vulnerable after decades of protecting yourself, that takes real courage. That's the kind of strength that actually matters. And boss, your family knows it. They trust you because you've proven you're willing to change everything to protect them. They love you because you chose them when you didn't have to. That's worth more than any empire." After Samuel left, Alec sat with those words, understanding their truth. Tomorrow he would marry Joanna in front of their children and promise things that terrified him: permanence, vulnerability, commitment that survived difficulty. And he would mean every word, because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, between rescuing a family from a storm and learning to play dragon with 4-year-olds, Alec Shaw had rediscovered his humanity, had remembered that connection was worth the risk of loss, that love was stronger than isolation, that choosing family meant accepting vulnerability, but gaining purpose. Tomorrow would make it official, but in his heart, where strategy couldn't reach and calculation didn't matter, Alec had already made his vows. He was theirs. They were his. Nothing would change that. Not enemies. Not danger. Not the complications that came from trying to protect family in a world built on violence. They were family now. Forever. And Alec Shaw, who'd spent 20 years building walls, had finally found something worth tearing them down for. The library at noon looked like something from a fairy tale. Though Alec suspected that was mostly Emma's influence, she'd insisted on the yellow flowers that now dominated the space, had arranged them herself with the serious concentration she applied to all important tasks, had declared the room perfect for a princess wedding, with the authority of a 6-year-old who knew exactly what ceremonies required. Alec stood near the makeshift altar Samuel had constructed, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars but that suddenly felt insignificant compared to the weight of what he was about to promise. Judge Martinez waited with the patience of someone who'd officiated enough weddings to recognize when one actually mattered, his expression carefully neutral, despite surely understanding the unusual circumstances that brought a mafia boss and a widow with 5 children to this moment. Connor stood beside Alec as his best man, the 8-year-old taking his role seriously, his small hand occasionally touching Alec's arm in a gesture that might have been reassurance, or might have been Connor's way of confirming this was real. Emma and the twins waited near the door with Elena, who'd volunteered to manage the children during the ceremony. All 3 girls wearing dresses that coordinated without matching, creating a riot of color that made the formal library feel almost joyful. Then the door opened and Joanna appeared, holding Sophie, and Alec forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple cream dress that managed to be elegant without being a traditional wedding gown, her auburn hair arranged in a style that was simultaneously casual and formal. But it wasn't the dress or the styling that made Alec's chest tighten. It was the expression on her face. Trust, hope, the absolute certainty of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't regret it. She walked toward him without music or formal procession, just a woman carrying her infant daughter, choosing to marry a man who'd found her family in a storm and decided to keep them. When she reached the altar, she handed Sophie to Elena and turned to face Alec with a smile that communicated more than words. "We're doing this," she said quietly. "We're doing this," Alec confirmed. Judge Martinez cleared his throat, signaling the beginning of formal ceremony. "We're gathered here today to witness the marriage of Alec Shaw and Joanna Reed. I understand this ceremony is non-traditional, that the circumstances are unusual, and that the family being formed here is built on foundations different from typical marriages. But that doesn't make it less valid. Love and commitment come in many forms. What matters is the choice being made to build a life together, to protect and support each other, to create family from intention, rather than just biology." He looked at Alec. "Alec Shaw, do you take Joanna Reed as your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Alec said, and the words felt enormous, carrying weight beyond legal contract. "And do you accept the responsibility of becoming father to her children? Connor, Emma, Lily, Michael, and Sophie, committing to their protection, their well-being, and their future as your own?" Alec looked at Connor standing beside him, at Emma and the twins watching with wide eyes, at Sophie sleeping peacefully in Elena's arms. "I do, absolutely, without reservation or condition. I accept the responsibility and the privilege of becoming their father." Judge Martinez turned to Joanna. "Joanna Reed, do you take Alec Shaw as your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Joanna said firmly. "And do you accept his commitment to your children, trusting him with their lives and their future, believing in his promise to protect and love them as his own?" "I do," Joanna said, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "I trust him completely, with their lives and their future and everything that matters most." "The couple has prepared their own vows," Judge Martinez said. "Alec, if you'd like to share yours first." Alec had written and rewritten his vows dozens of times in the past 3 days, struggling to articulate promises that felt adequate to the enormity of what he was committing to. But standing here, looking at Joanna and the children who were watching their mother marry the man who'd promised to protect them, the prepared words felt insufficient. He needed honesty instead of polish. "Joanna," Alec began, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. 2 weeks ago, I was driving through a storm, completely alone, convinced that isolation was safety and that vulnerability was weakness. Then I saw you and your children standing in impossible circumstances, and something broke through 20 years of emotional detachment. You needed rescue, and I needed purpose. You needed protection, and I needed family. You needed a home, and I needed to remember what home felt like." He paused, looking at Connor. "I promise to be the father these children deserve, not by replacing what was lost. Nothing can replace Michael or honor his memory better than the children he loved enough to try to protect, but by building their future on a foundation of safety and every resource I possess. Connor, I promise to teach you that being strong doesn't mean being alone. Emma, I promise to help you build all the castles you can imagine. Lily and Michael, I promise to listen to every debate with the seriousness you bring to them. And Sophie, his voice cracked slightly, I promise to be there for every milestone your father missed, carrying his love forward while adding my own. He turned back to Joanna. And to you, I promise partnership. Not control disguised as protection, but genuine collaboration in building this family. I promise transparency about my world and its dangers, trust that you can handle truth rather than comfortable lies. I promise to choose you every day, to fight for this family with everything I am, to never let isolation become more appealing than the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of sharing life with people who actually matter. Tears were streaming down Joanna's face, and Alec saw Emma crying too, though he suspected she didn't fully understand why. Even Connor's eyes were damp, the boy's careful control cracking under the weight of promises he desperately needed to hear. I promise to build something that survives difficulty, Alec continued. That doesn't collapse when things get complicated. That recognizes love isn't just feeling but commitment, choosing each other, especially when it's hard. I promise to be your husband, your partner, your children's father. Permanently, absolutely, without reservation. Because you've given me the thing I've been missing without knowing it, family worth fighting for, home worth building, connection worth protecting more than power or safety or the walls I built to keep everyone out. He stopped, emotion overwhelming his capacity for more words. I love you, I love them, and I promise to prove that every single day for the rest of my life. The silence that followed felt heavy with emotion. Judge Martinez wiped his own eyes before gesturing to Joanna. Your vows, Joanna. Joanna took a breath, steadying herself. Alec, I spent 8 months running from danger, teaching my children that safety was temporary and trust was dangerous and powerful men were threats rather than protectors. I taught them to be afraid of exactly what you are, wealthy, powerful, operating in worlds most people don't understand, and I was wrong. So completely, devastatingly wrong. You stopped for us when you didn't have to, she continued. You offered shelter when you could have kept driving. You chose vulnerability when isolation was safer. And in 2 weeks, you've proven that powerful men can be protectors. That wealth can create safety rather than just display status. That your world, complicated and sometimes frightening as it is, contains a man capable of profound love and genuine commitment. She looked at her children. My babies, mister. Alec is promising to be your father, to protect you and love you and help you grow into the people you're meant to be. And I believe him, trust him. Know with absolute certainty that he means every word. He's not replacing your dad, no one could. But he's becoming the father you need now, the protector you deserve, the constant you can count on. Turning back to Alec, Joanna continued, I promise to trust you with what matters most, my children's lives and futures. I promise to be honest about my fears instead of hiding behind walls I built to survive. I promise to let you be vulnerable without using that vulnerability as leverage. I promise to build this family with you as true partners, respecting your needs while maintaining my own identity, accepting your protection, while remaining strong enough to protect you when your world becomes dangerous. Her voice strengthened. I promise to love you, not gratefully, not conditionally, not because you saved us, though you did, but because you've proven you're worth loving, because you've shown my children what actual safety looks like, because you've transformed your fortress into our home, because you chose us when you didn't have to and you keep choosing us every day despite every complication we've brought to your carefully controlled life. I promise to be your wife, Joanna said, your partner, your family, to stand beside you when enemies come, to build something that survives whatever follows, to love you not despite your complicated world but including it, understanding that the same power that makes you dangerous makes you capable of protecting what matters most. I promise forever, Alec. Not the comfortable version, the real version that survives difficulty and grows stronger through challenges and chooses each other especially when it's hard. She smiled through tears. You saved my children's lives that night in the storm, but you saved mine too, from isolation disguised as independence, from fear disguised as strength, from believing safety required being alone. Thank you for stopping, for choosing us, for proving that family was worth tearing down walls for. Judge Martinez cleared his throat, visibly moved. The rings? Connor produced 2 simple platinum bands. Samuel had acquired elegant without being ostentatious, permanent without being showy. Alec took Joanna's hand, sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. With this ring, I claim you as mine, Alec said quietly. Permanently. Absolutely. Forever. Joanna took the second ring, placed it on Alec's hand with matching reverence. With this ring, I claim you as ours, as my husband, my children's father, My family. Forever. Then by the power vested in me by the state, Judge Martinez said. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Alec, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was different from any they'd shared before public, witnessed, carrying the weight of legal commitment and emotional promise. When they broke apart, both breathless, the small audience erupted in applause led by Emma's enthusiastic clapping and the twins' cheerful shouts. Connor stepped forward, his expression serious. Are you our dad now? Officially. Officially, Alec confirmed, kneeling so they were eye level. Legally, emotionally, permanently your dad. Is that okay with you? Yes, Connor said, and wrapped his arms around Alec's neck in a fierce hug that communicated more than words. Welcome to our family, Dad. The word dad hit Alec like a physical force, emotion overwhelming, careful control, tears tracking down his face in a display of vulnerability that would have horrified him 2 weeks ago. But here, now, surrounded by the family he'd chosen, crying felt like strength rather than weakness. Emma joined the hug, then the twins, then Joanna with Sophie, until they were a tangle of family in the middle of the library, holding each other with the fierce commitment of people who'd chosen connection over isolation, vulnerability over safety, love over the fear that made loving dangerous. We're family now, Emma declared with the certainty only children possessed. Real family. Forever family. Forever family? Alec agreed, and meant it with every part of himself that had spent 20 years learning to be alone, but had finally, impossibly, remembered how to belong. 6 months after the wedding, the estate had transformed in ways that had nothing to do with security upgrades and everything to do with the evidence of actual life being lived. Connor's artwork covered the refrigerator in the kitchen Joanna had claimed and made functional. Emma's castle construction projects occupied half the conservatory. The twins' debate about which dinosaur was superior had become a permanent installation in the form of competing poster boards in their room. And Sophie, now 9 months old, had discovered mobility and was determinedly exploring every corner of the house with the fearlessness only babies possessed. Alec sat in his office, no longer surrounded exclusively by security monitors but by photographs. The wedding day, Emma's 7th birthday party, Connor's first soccer game with the team Samuel had found, the twins building a snowman that looked more like an abstract sculpture, Joanna holding Sophie in the garden they'd planted together, evidence of 6 months of learning to be a family rather than just protected individuals hiding in a fortress. Samuel entered with his usual quiet efficiency, tablet in hand. Monthly security report, boss. You'll want to see this. Alec reviewed the summary Samuel had prepared, noting the steady decrease in threat assessments, the gradual acceptance by his competitors that the Reed family was permanently off limits, the shift from active threats to resigned acknowledgement. We're at baseline security now, Alec observed. No active threats for 3 months, no reconnaissance attempts for 6 weeks. The organizations that were hunting Joanna have backed off completely, because you made it clear the cost of touching your family was total destruction, Samuel said. Because you followed through on that promise twice when people tested your commitment. Because everyone in our world now understands that the Reed family, your family, is absolutely non-negotiable. At significant cost to some of my business relationships, Alec noted. At significant gain to your actual life, Samuel corrected. Boss, I've worked for you for 8 years. I've seen you build an empire, eliminate threats, establish dominance. And I've watched you be utterly alone through all of it. The past 6 months, seeing you transform into someone who has family dinners and helps with homework, and reads bedtime stories that's worth more than any business relationship you've damaged. Alec smiled, recognizing truth in Samuel's assessment. I'm legitimizing operations, transitioning everything to legal business holdings. No more gray areas, no more activities that require violence to maintain. It'll take another year to complete the transition, but I'm committed to it. My children deserve a father whose business won't get them killed. Joanna's influence? Samuel asked. My own, Alec corrected. Because I recognize that building wealth through illegal means creates vulnerability, creates leverage my enemies can use against my family. Legitimizing removes that vulnerability, makes me less interesting to law enforcement, makes my family safer long-term. It's strategic and personal simultaneously. The organization is adapting, Samuel said. Some of the old guard are uncomfortable with the changes, but most recognize that your commitment to legitimate business opens opportunities they didn't have before. Legal construction projects, real estate investments that don't require hiding ownership, trade relationships that can withstand scrutiny. You're building something more sustainable than what existed before. I'm building something my children can inherit without shame, Alec said. Something that doesn't require them to become what I was. Something that proves you can have power and wealth without requiring violence to maintain it. A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. Children's voices raised in the particular pitch that meant either crisis or extreme excitement. Alec was moving before Samuel could react, every protective instinct activated, reaching the hallway to find not danger but Emma and the twins surrounding Connor, who was holding a certificate and smiling with pride. I made honor roll, Connor announced when he saw Alec. All A's. My teacher said I'm reading at a 9th grade level, even though I'm only in 3rd, and I'm being recommended for the gifted program next year. The pride Alec felt was almost overwhelming. That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. It's because I'm not worried anymore, Connor said with the insight that constantly surprised Alec. When we were running, I couldn't focus on school, couldn't concentrate on learning when I was always watching for danger. But now, he gestured around the estate. Now I feel safe, actually safe. So my brain works better. The simple truth of that statement hit Alec with force. His protection wasn't abstract, it was allowing his son to thrive academically, because he no longer had to divert energy to constant survival vigilance. That was worth more than any business success Alec had ever achieved. Joanna appeared from the kitchen, Sophie on her hip, her expression holding the particular warmth that had become familiar over 6 months of marriage. Did Connor tell you about honor roll? I'm thinking we celebrate with whatever dinner he wants. Pizza, Connor said immediately. With extra cheese. And can we have ice cream after? We can have whatever you want, Alec confirmed. This deserves serious celebration. That evening, after pizza had been consumed and ice cream had created the inevitable mess, after baths had been navigated and pajamas negotiated and teeth brushed, Alec found himself once again reading bedtime stories to the twins, while Joanna handled Sophie and Connor read independently in his room, a new development that suggested growing confidence and security. When all the children were finally asleep, Alec and Joanna retreated to their private suite, the master bedroom they now shared, transformed from the austere space of a man who'd lived alone to something that felt like an actual couple's room. 6 months, Joanna said, settling beside him on the bed that no longer felt too large. 6 months since we went from strangers to married couple with 5 children. That's insane. That's perfect, Alec corrected. Every day I'm more certain that stopping for your family that night was the best decision I've ever made. Even with all the complications? Joanna asked. The threats we had to handle, the business relationships you had to damage, the way your entire life had to change to accommodate us? Especially because of the complications, Alec said. Because they prove this is real. That I'm willing to fight for it, change for it, build my entire existence around protecting it. Easy things don't require commitment. Difficult things, complicated families and dangerous circumstances, and having to choose between empire and connection, those require actual dedication. And I'm dedicated, Joanna, to you, to our children, to the life we're building. She moved closer, her head resting on his shoulder in the comfortable intimacy they'd developed over 6 months of sharing space and life. Connor called you Dad at dinner tonight. Not Mr. Alec or Alec. Just Dad, casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I heard, Alec said, emotion tightening his throat at the memory. Heard it, and had to excuse myself to the kitchen because I was about to cry in front of everyone. You can cry in front of everyone, Joanna said gently. The children need to see that you're human, that you have emotions. That being strong doesn't mean being invulnerable. I'm learning, Alec said. Learning that vulnerability with family is different from vulnerability in business. Learning that crying during bedtime stories or getting emotional at soccer games or being moved by honor roll certificates doesn't make me weak. It makes me human. It makes me their father instead of just their protector. You're a good father, Joanna said. A great husband. And you've transformed from an isolated tactician into someone who builds castles with 6-year-olds and debates dinosaurs with 4-year-olds and reads at a 9th grade level with 8-year-olds, just to keep up with his son. That transformation, that's the most impressive thing I've ever witnessed. I had good motivation, Alec said. 5 children and a woman who needed me to be something other than what I'd become, who trusted me with what mattered most and forced me to rise to the occasion. You saved me, Joanna. Saved me from isolation that was killing me slowly. From power that meant nothing. From walls so high I'd forgotten what connection felt like. We saved each other, Joanna corrected. You saved us from the storm and the threats and the endless running. I saved you from loneliness and emotional detachment and building empires that left you completely alone. We're mutual salvation. That's what makes this work. They lay in comfortable silence, the house quiet except for the normal sounds of family children sleeping soundly, security systems monitoring without crisis, the evidence of life being lived rather than just survived. I want to adopt them, Alec said suddenly. Legally adopt all 5 children. Make it permanent in ways that survive anything. So they're mine legally and emotionally, and in every way that matters. So if anything happens to you, God forbid. But if it does, they stay with me. No questions, no custody battles, no possibility they get taken by the state or relatives. They're mine permanently. Joanna was quiet for a moment, processing this request. You want to legally replace Michael as their father. I want to honor Michael by protecting what he loved most, Alec corrected carefully. I'm not replacing him. I'm not erasing him from their history or pretending he didn't matter. But Joanna, I am their father now. I've been their father for 6 months, and I want that formalized in every possible way. I want my name on their documents. I want legal parental rights that can't be challenged. I want them to be Shaws if they choose, or to hyphenate, or to keep Reed if that's more comfortable. But I want the legal connection that proves they're mine. They already are yours, Joanna said. Then let's make it official, Alec said. Let's formalize what we all already know. That we're family. That this is permanent. That 6 months ago you stumbled into my protection by accident and I'm keeping you forever by choice. Yes, Joanna said. Yes, adopt them. Make it legally binding. Make it permanent in every way possible. They're yours, Alec. Completely. Just like I am. The adoption paperwork was filed the following week, processed through channels that understood discretion, finalized with efficiency that money and influence provided. And 3 months later, Alec sat in family court watching a judge declare him legal father to Connor, Emma, Lily, Michael Jr., and Sophie Shaw Reed, the hyphenation a compromise that honored both the father they'd lost and the father they'd gained. Connor cried. Emma cheered. The twins debated whether this meant they were princes now, and Sophie, at 12 months old, remained blissfully unaware that anything significant had happened beyond getting to wear a fancy dress. But Alec understood that in a courthouse designed for broken families, they'd just formalized a family built from wreckage and choice and stubborn refusal to let circumstances define them. They'd proven that family wasn't just biology, it was commitment and choice, and showing up every day to build something that survived difficulty. That evening, after the courthouse visits and celebration dinners and excited children had finally been convinced to sleep, Alec found himself once again in his office. But the security monitors that had once dominated his attention were now supplemented by family calendars, school schedules, soccer practice reminders, pediatrician appointments, evidence of a life lived beyond just maintaining safety. Joanna appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with the comfortable familiarity of someone who belonged. The children are asleep. All of them. Simultaneously. It's a miracle. It's peace, Alec corrected. The kind that comes from feeling safe enough to sleep without vigilance. The kind that took months to build, but that's worth everything we went through to achieve it. She moved into the office, settling into the chair across from him that had become hers over 9 months of marriage. Do you regret it? Any of it? Stopping that night, taking on a ready-made family, transforming your entire existence to accommodate us? No, Alec said without hesitation. Not for a second. Not on the hardest days or the most complicated moments or when business relationships crumbled because I chose family over strategic advantage. This, he gestured around, encompassing more than just the office but the entire life they'd built. This is the best thing I've ever done. The only thing that actually mattered. Everything before was just practice for learning to be their father, your husband, part of a family that chose each other against impossible odds. We were lucky, Joanna said. Lucky you stopped that night. Lucky you chose to help instead of driving past. Lucky everything aligned to bring us together. Not luck, Alec corrected. Choice. My choice to stop. Your choice to trust me despite every reason you'd learned to distrust powerful men. Our children's choice to accept me as their father. Our collective choice to build something permanent from circumstances that could have been temporary. That's not luck, that's commitment. He stood, moving around the desk to pull her up into his arms, holding her with the ease of 9 months of learning to be physically close. I love you. I love our children. And I love the life we're building, complicated, messy, imperfect, and more valuable than anything I spent 20 years accumulating before I met you. I love you too, Joanna said. Love that you stopped being a fortress and became a home. Love that you transformed from isolated tactician to father who builds castles and reads bedtime stories. Love that you chose us when you didn't have to, and you keep choosing us every single day. They stood in the office that had once been a command center but was now just another room in a house that had become home, holding each other while their children slept securely in bedrooms they'd claimed as their own, in an estate that had transformed from fortress to family sanctuary. Outside, the world continued with its threats and complications and dangers that never completely disappeared. But inside these walls, 5 children and 2 adults who'd found each other in a storm had built something stronger than isolation, more valuable than safety, more permanent than the circumstances that could have destroyed them. They'd built home. Not the structure, though the estate provided security and comfort. Not the wealth, though resources provided opportunities. But the connection between people who'd chosen each other despite every reason fear provided to stay alone. The commitment between a man who'd built walls and a woman who'd been running. The family forged from a widow and her children and a mafia boss who discovered that protecting something was more fulfilling than building empires. They'd built home. And home, Alex Shaw had finally learned after 40 years of living, wasn't a place you defended. It was people you chose, and he'd chosen well. They all had. Forever family, as Emma had declared months ago. Forever home, as Alec now understood with absolute certainty. Forever theirs, built from storm and choice and stubborn love that refused to accept that safety required isolation. They were home. Finally, completely, permanently home, and that was worth everything. The end.